We're gonna go live here.
Um,
And we are live. I'm here with Jonathan. Jonathan, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good. Thanks
So,
for taking the time. Thanks for coming on. I guess I like to start by having my guest go back way back to the before the age of reason when you were a young lad in Vancouver, Canada, supposedly, and your first sort of inclination that there's a God, there's religion,
so
who is Jesus, and all these sorts of things, and just touch on the highlights of your whole upbringing up until early adulthood, go through the adolescence, puberty, all that nasty stuff, and then up till today. How old are you today? Where are you living today?
okay.
And how's your faith walk going? So it's a lot to ask, but it's a good
So,
challenge, and people always rise to the occasion with some good highlights.
so just everything then. Yeah. Well, you said before the age of reason, which presupposes that there is an enlightenment that eventually comes. But I don't know if that's the case. I'll go back to the beginning then. Yeah, I'm from Vancouver, Canada. I was born and raised in Canada. Um, my kind of story, my family didn't go to church initially as a child, but we started going at some point in my childhood, and I've never been able to pin down the date or the exact reasons why. Everyone has a different story for why we started going to church, and I have no idea which one's correct. Um, but we started going to church, maybe I was like 9 or 10 or something. And Vancouver's an incredibly secular place, or at least a non-Christian place. I think there's a type of spirituality there, but it's certainly not Christian. I believe it's the least church place in North America. And you said you're in Montreal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Montreal's secularizing quite quickly as
Oh yeah.
well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, very much. So, um, growing up in that context, it was interesting because I think a lot of American Christians, they have a very specific experience of this evangelical culture and world in which they exist. And I just never had that. My upbringing feels thoroughly secular. And then one day a week, I went to this other realm, this Narnian place that was hidden away. But those two worlds never bled into each other in any way. And so I had a very thoroughly secular kind of upbringing, I think is probably the way to put that, with this sort of odd church thing on the side. And I think I probably would have left religion altogether, which a lot of my family have and did. But right as I was kind of getting to that age where I was questioning everything, um, a new youth pastor came in who just heavily invested in me. And he was just very patient and almost a second father figure. And just learning from him and journeying through life with him just kind of changed everything for me. He gave me an alternative way of kind of experiencing reality. And I think, yeah, that was just highly influential on me. Was having this person who takes their faith seriously, who's intellectually engaged, but's also just an incredibly caring person. Um, and that kind of changed my direction. I think I was planning to go do a 2-year thing and then transfer to UBC in Vancouver. But at the age of 17, I kind of had this sort of almost conversion experience where um, just kind of almost overnight, I went from, I don't know if I believe or not, like maybe I do, maybe I don't, to I'm going to go be a minister. And I kind of haphazardly said, well, where did you go? And the youth pastor told me, and I said, well, I'll go where you went. And I didn't think anything else about it. It was one of the dumbest decisions I've ever made. It was totally random. I didn't give it much thought. And where he went to do his schooling was a undergraduate Bible college in the Bible Belt in Joplin, Missouri. So I went from least church place in North America, Vancouver, to one of the most conservative, like it's like a fundamentalist Bible college in Missouri. And so I moved down there at 17. I'd never been there to visit, didn't really know what to expect. I show up, and my background in Vancouver, being there, like I would say I was Christian, but I was all the things that evangelicals don't identify as Christian at the time. I was pro-gay, I was pro-abortion, pro-feminism, all of these types of things. And then I showed up in Missouri And it was just like, there was this huge kind of clash that happened in my first year. But I managed to get past that first year. And I think I started to be a bit humbled and to open up more conversationally and listen more to the community. And I think the community was learning how to engage with me and be patient with me. And I think we started to learn from each other. And I ended up with some really amazing friendships that I still have today. Every night at 9 p.m., I talk for 5 minutes to the same group of 4 guys that were on the dorm floor with me then. They're all pastors now, but we talk every single night. And so those friendships were very formative, formative for how we think about faith, how we live, for our marriages, our just general way of being and our ministry. And so that was a very challenging transition to a small conservative Christian place. But I was really appreciative to have had that experience. And then after doing that, I moved back to Vancouver, where I did my master's at Regent College. And I got out of this kind of conservative environment just in time to miss the whole Trump fiasco. And so my memories and nostalgia for that context, kind of, I had that kind of nostalgic memory of that. And then I watched in horror from the outside as that kind of world felt like it jumped off a cliff. And I've still been processing that for a while. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts on that, but it's a confusing time to have affiliations with evangelicalism.
I just watched, excuse me, I just watched a horrifying documentary about Liberty University and the Jerry Falwell Jr., the sex scandal. I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about it. I hadn't heard anything about it. I just knew Jerry Falwell Sr. was a big player in the evangelical scene back in the day. I had no idea what Liberty University was or what his son was up to. And it's nauseating just lifting that rock and taking a little peek underneath it. The most depressing part for me was that the pool boy, if you know the story, the pool boy was ostensibly Catholic, and that just put a stake in my heart. It's like, you should know better. You should have some self-control, and you should know what the church teaches about intimacy, marriage, and all those things. So that was the most depressing part. You know, when an evangelical flies off the rails, doesn't hurt me quite as badly as when a Catholic does. No offense to anyone who's not Catholic, but it's just
I don't know the story. I guess I thought of the pool boy more as the victim than anything, but I don't know the story well enough to really say.
Victim, yeah, it's hard to say like who's the victim. We're all victims of Satan's lies. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So, in terms of your siblings, how many siblings do you have?
I have one sister.
That's it?
Yep, just a sister. So.
Okay. So pretty small family. And are you close with your sister and your folks, or?
Yeah, I think we're pretty close. So I.
But you're the only religious one.
My mom is religious. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about my family in a public context.
Yeah, of course.
So I'll I won't go too far into that. Okay. But we have lots of interesting discussions, I think is what I would say.
Okay. Yeah. Just police yourself, because I'm very open and I have no shame and I talk about everything. There are a few things.
Well, I'm pretty open about everything that has to do with myself.
Of course.
Yeah.
But I just like to get the context of the family. We have a pretty good idea that you come from Vancouver and what that was like and all that sort of stuff. So I won't press you at all. But you know, it's about you. This episode is about you and your walk with God. And I want you to talk a little bit now before we sort of jump into some of the interesting books that I'm looking at behind your head here. I want you to talk about the darkest times in your faith journey. You know, you said just before you had this sort of reconversion moment at age 17 or 18, whatever it was, you were dabbling maybe a little bit with some darker worldview or something like that. Was puberty an issue? Like, was sexual sin something that dominated you at any point? Just talk as much as you're comfortable. Again, just police yourself as best you can.
Just kind of tear it open. Yeah. So I think like many people, I was growing up right as the internet was coming into homes. And so I had a laptop in high school. And so I think um, pretty much like almost anyone I know from that time period, pornography was an issue. And that's something that took years to kind of fight my way out of. Um, and I think of it sort of like being an alcoholic, a recovered alcoholic, where it's like you could have been a recovered alcoholic for 5 years, but you still can't take one drink because you could suddenly fall off the deep end.
Yeah,
Um, which I'm not embarrassed of because my impression is that about 95% of the population is in the same boat.
exactly.
And I think my impression isn't just that porn is sexual sin. I think it opens you up to this whole world where you have to keep going darker and more
Yeah,
intense and more insane. And it takes you to a dark place
yeah,
that I don't think you would have ever expected the first few times you tried it. So that's a factor, of
yeah.
course. I think part of it was my parents went through a divorce when I was 16. Um, and that's not as bad as being younger, but it's also a formative time. And I think I, yeah, I think like most kids, I had a sense that I didn't really fit in anywhere, a sense that I didn't know who I was. I, you know, it's, you know, and I think in Vancouver, um, I had a real sense that I didn't know how to bring together the two pieces of my experience, this secular world and this religious one. And I don't want to say the religious one won out because I think I have a very weird merger of the two that a lot of people don't seem to resonate with. But yeah,
So,
so
what happened geographically? Not that it's that important, but it's kind of interesting. Like you went down to Missouri. How do you say it? Missouri? How do they say it?
Missouri.
Missouri.
I don't know. It just felt like misery. No, no.
Where'd you go
They
from there,
say,
though?
so I finished my undergraduate degree there. Then I went and did my master's at Regent College. And during that time, I got married to a girl that I'd met at the college in Missouri. And we've been together 11 years now.
Nice.
And we have, so she moved up there and she couldn't work because of legal stuff because she's American. So I ended up going and getting a ministry job for 5 years. And I was the English pastor at a Chinese Mennonite church,
Ah.
which those exist. They're real. I didn't make that up. And so I did that full time for 5 years while completing my master's part time. And then we moved to the UK. We were going to start trying to have a family, but then we weren't able to have children. We tried fertility stuff. It didn't work. So we said, okay, well, maybe we'll adopt in the future. But if we're not going to start a family now, why don't I go do my PhD? So we moved to England and I did my second master's and a PhD at Cambridge University. And in the middle of that, we somehow mysteriously got pregnant, which we thought wasn't supposed to be able to happen, but we did get pregnant mid PhD. And it turns out it was twin boys. So that was fun being in a foreign country mid PhD. And my wife was the one who was the breadwinner because I was doing school and she was working. But then suddenly she was pregnant and couldn't go to work. And then she had to stay home with the kids. So it was a pretty insane, ridiculous period. But thankfully, things finally started to get in place when I finished my PhD at the end of 2020, just in time for COVID to come and screw everything up again. And we've basically just been sprinting ever since, trying to catch up. Our kids are 4 now, and they both have autism. So
Oh,
our lives have just been insane. Um,
wow.
but after
Wow.
the PhD, um, I got a job as an assistant professor of theology and philosophy at Lincoln Christian University, which is actually part of the same movement that my undergraduate was. And so it's been an interesting time of leaving that context, being outside of it, reflecting on it, coming back into it, and that back and forth has been interesting. I think my whole faith journey has been one of taking two extremes and trying to find a way to marry them. And in some ways, that's the same incarnational task of trying to find out how Christ manifests in culture, just over and over again. And so that's been exciting and challenging and interesting. So,
Wow. So, remind me if I didn't catch it. How many years were you in Cambridge?
3.
Three
Yeah.
years. Okay.
So,
I spent about 2 years in England between, well, we lived a bit in Scotland, Leicester, which is in the Midlands, and then London. We
mm,
traveled around a lot, but we never went to Cambridge, but it's about halfway between Leicester and London.
yeah.
Um, so just sort of for fun to reminisce about England because I love England. I love the landscape and the rain is better there, right? It's a nicer rain.
Yeah. Well, and Cambridge actually has the least rainfall in England, I believe.
Ah,
So,
is
yeah.
it so it's kind of sunny?
Yeah, there's not much rain there, which
Ah,
actually made me sad because I
oh,
grew up in Vancouver, and unless there is rain, I don't feel safe.
oh.
So yeah, I often will just play rain and just have it playing in the background when I'm at my house. So yeah,
That reminds me of some Scandinavian country where it rains, the city where it rains the most, and they have a festival of rain and they habituate the kids to love the rain. It's very cute, very
yeah.
touching. But yeah, the rain is nice in England. I didn't like it in Vancouver. I lived in Vancouver. I hated the vibe
Mm.
or the lack of vibe, whatever it is. And this is no offense to you and to your kind, okay? To each his own, but I'm East Coast, man. East
It's
Coast.
okay. We hate all of you. I mean, you could have said you were from Toronto. That would have been really bad.
Ah.
But no, Vancouver is very snobbish towards, I don't even know what to specify, just everyone who's not in Vancouver. Um, so
Yeah, yeah.
I understand.
It's a
So,
special place. It's a very special place. We lived in Kitts Beach, which is nice.
oh yeah, that's right around where I lived in False Creek, right by Granville Island. So
Okay.
that's where I grew up.
Yeah,
So
Kitsilano was kind of yuppie, kind of like hippie, hobo chic, whatever. And we met a lot of interesting people there. I don't know if you know Chris Ward. He ran a junk shop there in Kitsilano.
oh
Chris
cool.
Ward, older guy, but eccentric, very eccentric. We met a lot of eccentrics there.
It would have been amazing if I randomly knew this one guy in Vancouver.
Could be. It
So
could be.
yeah.
So
So
anyway, enough about the nostalgia. Um, but what did you eat when you were in England? Did you like the food or?
yeah, just a lot of pub food.
Uh,
Um, yeah, it's
it's good though. The chips are good.
yeah, the chips are great. The thick, chunky chips. Even the
Bangers and
mushy
mash.
peas, all of it is part of the aesthetic. What I really adore, though, is the full English breakfast. So at my
Ah,
college at Cambridge, everyone gets their own college, which is sort of like a Hogwarts house, and they had a breakfast each morning, a full English breakfast that was only £2 if you were a member of the college. And so every morning I would go before class and I would get a full English breakfast. So that's
wow.
sausages, beans, bacon, black pudding, tomatoes, toast, all of this. It's an insane amount of very greasy, very British food. And then I would get it on a plate, and then I would go sit in the dining hall, which is essentially like the dining hall from the Harry Potter movies. Because the dining hall from the Harry Potter movies were actually filmed in Oxbridge. So, and I would just sit there alone because nobody else woke up at 7 a.m. to go to the breakfast. And I would just quietly eat, looking around at this insane dining hall with tapestries surrounding me and just sausage dripping down my mouth. So it was glorious.
Amazing,
But
amazing.
yeah.
I was surprised because I'd heard so many people bashing British, what do they call it? Like the food, I forget what the word is for that, but just the way that their food is, that it's not good. But I loved the grocery stores. I really loved the variety that they had and the special items that they had that I couldn't find anywhere else. And
Yeah.
even their little, their packets of crisps and their cookies and everything is it's just cute, and
Yeah.
so I really love it. And I found the people very cold and hard to get to know. They're polite, they're nice, but you can't break through the barrier. Like, what do you have to do to get close to someone there? I have no idea. The immigrants, on the other hand, the East Asians, yeah, they'll open their heart right away. But the
Yeah.
British, oh my God, it's tough. They're tough.
Yeah. Well, my dad's actually British. I have a British passport through that, so I'm, I guess I'm used to it. But I did have a similar experience where I found the British people to be constantly unamused by interactions with me. And I regularly would hear people say things like, as I walked away, they'd say in the back of their breath, Americans, and I would get to yell, "I'm Canadian!" back when it was wonderful. So,
So how much did you culturally adopt when you were living in the States? Did you become American?
well, my wife's American. My children were born in England, so they actually have tri-citizenship:
Ah,
American, British, and Canadian.
right.
Um, so, uh, I think I feel like a person who has no home and no culture or identity. I feel like I don't know who I am anymore because I've lived in three different countries for substantial periods of time, and I can enter into the world of any of them and talk the way I talked at that time and place and think that way. And all of them make sense in their own right. And again, this comes back to how is God going to bring together these different worlds for me? And there's been mediation on some things, but overall, I just feel like a compartmentalized person. Um, and uh, so I feel American. I understand my American friends. I get the politics. I get all of that stuff. But I also feel Canadian, looking at America in disgust, going, "What the hell, guys?" Uh, you know, and I just yeah, I just feel all of those different angles.
Well, you
And
look like a Norseman, a Viking, so you can identify also with your roots going back many decades, many, well, centuries even, right? To you've got some
yeah,
Norse blood in you, probably, right?
well, we'll see. So we'll see where I end up when I die. If it's Valhalla, I gotta have a sword. Well,
You got the hammer.
I do have this right here. So,
That
but
helps. That
I have to
helps.
die holding that. I can't just die. I have to be holding that when I die
And so
to get in.
geographically right now, where are you? I have no idea where you are right now.
So I'm in Illinois. I'm just south of Chicago in
Okay.
Lincoln, Illinois.
Okay.
So I'm back in the States.
Well,
So
Chicago, I find Chicago, I've been to Chicago. I find it's a very Canadian feeling city. I feel like, if you avoid the bad neighborhoods, it feels clean. It feels bright and light. It's called the Windy City, but there is a lot of fresh air there, I find. Just spiritually, I find it fresh. This was decades ago now, so it may have
hmm.
changed. Okay. But do you agree that it's a pretty easy breezy vibe in the good parts?
um well, I've only been there maybe two or three times.
Oh, okay.
But so I I like Chicago. I think any big city in the States feels closer to me because of the cosmopolitan and multiculturalness
Yeah.
of inherent to urban areas.
Yeah.
Um, that feels closer to Canada for me. And
Yeah.
that might just be because I'm from Vancouver as well,
Yeah.
which is a big city. But I
No.
definitely associate America with small conservative towns and Canada with big liberal cities. But that's because I lived in a city in Canada and
Ah.
a small town in America, and I haven't lived in a small town in Canada or a big city in
Oh,
America.
I see. Oh,
So
very interesting. Wow, very interesting. Yeah. So, I don't know if you've been to Quebec, but Montreal is completely different from the small hick towns. And I don't know if I'm left or right. I try not to be left or right, just try to be Christian. But I'm way more comfortable in the big city than I am in the country because I just can't relate. I just can't relate to that vibe. And I
yeah,
like to have the diversity. Like I'd rather live in an ugly, dirty, crime-filled sin city than in a tightly controlled, conservative, country bumpkin atmosphere. And I have lived in the country here in Quebec, and I did not enjoy it. I did not fit in. I was not welcomed. I was not loved, and I was not accepted. And I felt like I was I was discriminated against for being an Anglophone. Which is weird
mm,
because I don't feel that in Montreal at all.
yeah.
So anyway, back to religion, the topic at hand here. What denomination are you today, and how many denominations did you toy with or dabble in?
So I initially, when we first started going to church when I was younger, we were in the Anglican church.
Ah,
Um, the community I was a part of when I went to an undergraduate Bible college was part of the Restoration movement,
okay.
which is a Christian, an evangelical denomination in the States. And then uh, when I moved back to Vancouver to do ministry, I was part of a
Mennonite.
Chinese Mennonite
Mennonite. Yeah.
denomination. Yeah.
How would you
Uh,
characterize the Mennonite faith?
well, it's interesting because I have a specifically Chinese version of it.
Ah,
So in many ways, these communities were immigrants who came over for China who weren't specifically Mennonite but needed a home.
Friendship Center, whatever.
Yeah, and the Mennonites took them in. So uh, there's a lot of Chinese Mennonites who aren't pacifists, who
Okay,
don't identify with a lot of the things that make you Mennonite,
I see.
but they're Mennonite because the Mennonite community gave them a denominational home when they
Ah,
immigrated,
ah.
and they just so um so I there's definitely some things I like about the Mennonite community. And again, this is the tension. I feel at home in all of those contexts and in none of them. So yeah.
Wow. So did your appreciation of Chinese culture, language, and the people and the food get affected by dealing with these people at all?
I'm still unpacking that
Okay.
because it's still in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah.
Um, and so I find I don't understand a period until quite later
Mm.
after it's happened. I think there were definitely moments where I realized just how massive our cultural assumptions are, and how easily they differ on things that we just assume all normal, rational people would agree with you on. I mean, that's been the case not just with my Chinese experience, but with every different place I've gone. Um, Food wise, it was too authentic for me on many occasions. You know, we would there this at every Chinese celebration, we would all go out to a restaurant, and without fail, if it wasn't dim sum, it was this traditional Chinese 10-course meal, and the first thing would always be jellyfish, and it didn't get that much better from there. I remember one time I went out with the Chinese pastor on because our church had two pastors, a Chinese pastor and an English pastor, and I went out with the Chinese pastor to an authentic Chinese restaurant, and he said he would order for me, and I said, okay, just nothing that's too seafoody, and he said, okay, it won't have a lot of seafood, and it comes out the plate, it had 4 mini octopuses on top of it. I'm not, there were actually little baby octopuses right on top. And I was looking at it and he's just like, what? This, and I just, so that, you said food. So the food encounter was fun. I did fall in love with dim sum. That is an amazing experience. But as for the cultural encounter, I got a lot out of it. I enjoyed it a lot. I think, funnily enough, it was an advantage in some ways to not come from the culture. The turnover for English pastors in our denomination was an average of 2 years, and I was there 5 years. So by the end of it, I was actually, I believe, the longest serving member, even though I was the only white guy in the denomination. And I think what was helpful was that a lot of the Chinese churches were trying to force the English pastors to do things the Chinese way. But the English pastors, while they might be ethnically Chinese, were mostly raised in Canada. And so there was a lot of turnover because they kept getting forced to run their ministries in ways that were antithetical to everything they believed in. But with me, nobody thought I was going to be able to do things the Chinese way. So they kind of just let me do what I wanted. So there was a lot of pressure on actually ethnically Chinese pastors to honor their Chinese roots. Whereas with me, everyone's like, well, he's white. Well, he's just not going to get it. He's an idiot. Just
Got
let him
carte
do what he's
blanche.
doing.
You got carte
Yeah.
blanche, pun intended. So
So,
I've been looking at you. I want you to promote your book. Maybe do that first, and then we'll talk about some of the books behind you.
oh yeah. So this is uh, my book that came out recently, Monotheism, an absurdly arrogant attempt to answer all the problems of the last 2,000 years in one night in a pub. So that's available on Amazon. It's also available as an audiobook on Amazon. I got a Hollywood actor guy to do the voices. So
Ah,
it's a Socratic dialogue back and forth set in a pub. Um, and it's about the Trinity and free will and the origins of the universe and how all three of those things are deeply related. So
who was in the pub with you?
so there's three characters.
Or it's fictional. There was no pub. There was no pub night,
There's
really.
no pub. It's not a real
It's
pub.
fictional.
Yeah,
Okay, okay,
it's a fictional pub.
okay.
So yeah.
So but who did you put in the pub?
Uh, there's two professors arguing, and then there's a waitress, and they
Okay,
all kind of get into it. So
okay. I've enjoyed books like that. I've
yeah,
read at least one that I can think of. I can't remember the title of it, but I remember it was a short book, and it was just a conversation, and they all had distinct roles to play.
yeah,
There was a Calvinist, some sort of Platonist. I can't remember. I should dig up that book. That was a funny one. But I'm a big fan of Socrates. He's my absolute all-time favorite secular philosopher of all time. I like Plato a lot because I have to give him credit for giving me Socrates.
yeah.
And I may be misunderstanding who Socrates was because I see it through the lens of Plato, but I'm not as big a fan of Aristotle. I just think he's whatever, boring, dry. I just don't feel the vibe. That's probably a
Well,
pretty common attitude to have, right?
it is, and in reading Aristotle, I do find him a lot harder to read. And Plato writes these
Colorful stuff.
conversational things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Though I think it's notable that we don't actually have that much of what Aristotle actually wrote. A lot
Right.
of it is stuff kind of put together later.
Yeah.
And so I've heard some say that Aristotle was supposed to be quite an actually enjoyable
Okay.
writer or pretty good at rhetoric, but
I see.
we don't get that,
We're getting
which is
his
sad.
dim-witted students' notes, stuff like that.
I would be terrified for the record of me to be based on what my undergraduate students wrote down in class. That like you're gonna get a lot of stuff that's just
Uh,
not, yeah. So
so
anyways, yeah,
he may
that's
well have
the
been the greatest and the brightest of the three.
yeah. So
What were
yeah,
you going to say about
maybe.
your book?
So well, anyways, that's kind of the Socratic format of the book. It's meant to be lively and playful and fun, but at the same time, this was not meant to just be solely a popular level book.
Okay.
I'm trying to put forward what I consider a novel academic argument. And some people have said, well, then you should have written a more academic book.
Hmm.
But my sense is that actually the Socratic dialogue is the most ancient of academic formats. Um, if we're really going to go back to the Greeks. So yeah, it's
What's your
like,
thesis?
basically the argument that unfolds at this pub is one guy just doesn't think the Trinity makes sense, and the other one says, "You're right, it doesn't make sense." But I think that it doesn't make sense in precisely the same way that the origins of the universe doesn't make sense. And if they're actually the same problem, then you can no more deny the existence of the Trinity than you can deny your own existence. So that's the argument, is that yeah, the Trinity doesn't make sense, but when you look at the origins of the universe, how anything got here at all, it also doesn't make sense. Those discussions also break down. And crucially, I argue in the book that they break down for exactly the same reasons that discussions about the Trinity break down. The same fundamental philosophical enigma that is present at the origins of the universe is also present when we talk about the Trinity. And if that is the case, if it's the same problem philosophically manifesting in both, then you can't deny the Trinity for being irrational any more than you can deny your own existence, because somehow or other we're here. The universe did begin to exist, and so that's the argument.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I studied philosophy as a hobby for over a decade, probably, well, my whole adult life, really on and off, just as a hobby. but I was struck by the four antinomies of Kant, and he talked about the the
Yeah.
boundaries of the universe and what just like there, it's just lose lose. Like you pick a side, you're going to be wrong. Like it doesn't matter what you do. And I disagree with him about the existence of a necessary being. I think that we can know that with certainty, just through the natural light of reason. But I noticed you named your kids Søren and Augustine. So were
Yep.
you a fan of Kierkegaard's philosophy and
Yeah.
St. Augustine's philosophy and
So
theology?
I'm always afraid to say that I am, because as soon as I say that, some Augustine scholar starts talking to me like I should know everything about him. But so one of the first books I read after my sort of conversion experience was St. Augustine's Confessions.
Yeah, me too.
And that was a formative encounter. I think his autobiographical reflectiveness just really swept me up. And also his musings on the nature of time and God's relationship to time. I mean, that's very much what the book ended up being about. The origins of the universe. How did time begin? How's that related to the Trinity and God? So Augustine's Confessions were very formative for me. And then I was reading Kierkegaard, Sickness unto Death, Fear and Trembling, while we were trying to have kids the first time. And I guess I slowly inceptioned my wife to think that was a cool name. So I definitely won the naming battle.
I guess the name means like strict or severe or something like that.
Yeah, it's like like the way it's supposed to be is like Søren, like that's what you're supposed to say. Søren. Yeah, like severe.
What about
So,
another famous philosopher, an atheist philosopher that I am reading right now, Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Have you read it?
I have.
Did you enjoy
So
it?
yeah. Oh yeah, I loved it. I think in a weird way, his writing style very much echoes my own,
Ah,
and that's kind of the bridging of my secular and Christian worlds. Is that I think I tend to come off more like a product of that world, but with the views of a Christian.
well,
So
he was a hardcore atheist and he made no bones about it, but I just started rereading it. I read it when I was a teenager, but I just started rereading it, and a lot of the people that I tell that I mentioned the fact that Douglas Adams was a devout atheist, and they're like, "Really? I got the impression that he believed in God." Like that's the impression you get, right? Like he's delving
yeah,
into the mystery of the universe. He makes fun of evolution. I'm a young Earth creationist. I don't know about you, but he makes fun of evolution. I find it hilarious. But he also pokes fun at God too. But I get the distinct
well, there's
impression
that
that he
bit
was
where
concerned with these deep issues anyway.
yeah, there's that great bit where they're building the worlds and they make sure to get the dinosaur bones in there to trick everybody. Well, and he also has that, I think it's him, where the puddle says, "This puddle's quite nice. It seems perfectly shaped." The puddle's reflecting that the hole in the ground that he's in is perfectly shaped to accommodate him, and so must have been created specifically for him as a puddle. Um, and there are those great moments. Well, I mean, of course, the whole thing starts with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and this has been considered a bad move. So, yeah,
Well, we have to have a sense of humor. I mean, Christians, some Christians anyway, give Christianity a bad reputation just because they're Soren, they're
there we go.
dour, and
Yeah.
we have to have joy. What's your impression? And I'm gonna grill you on some of the books behind you, but what's your impression of the Catholic saints and the Catholic Church and the obviously messy fallen world that we live in, and how the church is obviously prone to corruption and worldliness and all these sorts of things? And one of our popes just passed away, and we've got Pope Francis that took over from him and all these sorts of things. There's a lot to talk about in terms of just impressions you have from outside of the Catholic Church. You could even talk about relatives, friends and relatives you've known who've been good Catholics, bad Catholics. Just generally, what comes to mind when the topic of Catholicism comes up for you?
Okay. Well, you've made a mistake because you've given me a chance to talk about my own podcast here. So
Okay,
I'm going to hijack and self-promote a little bit
do
more.
it.
We actually, so I do a podcast, the Spiritually Incorrect podcast, and we just had John Reimer from Eastern University. He's a historian on to talk about the subject, Who's Afraid of Catholicism? uh,
Yeah.
and to go through that topic.
Ah,
It has been on my mind this last month.
cool.
If you're interested in that
Yeah.
subject, obviously
Yeah.
check out the episode on spirituallyincorrectpodcast.com.
Yeah, I linked it in
Um,
the description of this episode, so people will go there.
hey, well, this is, I'm learning how to self-promote
Yeah.
shamelessly. Um, anyways, and talking to him, it was just the nuances he brought as a historian to
Is he Catholic?
everything. Yeah, he's Catholic. He became Catholic. He was originally Protestant. He just he does what historians do best, which is complicate the crap out of everything. And it really makes clear anytime a Protestant tries to say something about, say, the Reformation, and to say, well, this is what the Catholics were doing, and Luther reformed, and well, it's more complicated than that. You have to think about this, and this, and I find that Catholicism is so rich and complex that anytime I think I've pinned it down or critiqued it, I just haven't read enough, is really what the reality is. You could say that for Protestantism too. You really say that for anything. But
We can caricature Calvinism pretty easily, for example.
yeah, very much so. My mother has been dating long term for almost a decade, a Catholic, and so they go to mass together now. So
Oh.
it's in my family, and it's never been something I was terribly uncomfortable with. I think there are certain prejudices that kind of abound culturally about the Catholic Church, as there are with evangelicals, which I'm sure I share in knowingly or unwittingly. But
Well, you never told me what you are. Are
yeah.
you non-denominational? You're evangelical? What are you?
Well, I'm not answering that question. Well, currently, I'm part of my school is part of the Restoration movement.
Ah, is that
And
about the
so,
movement of the Holy Spirit?
uh, no,
No?
it's not. It's not. Do you mean in a charismatic sense, or?
Yeah, like this is the restoration is going to be like another Pentecost, a Pentecostal sort of style thing.
Well, Acts 2 is pretty foundational for the movement. So there is a huge emphasis upon returning to the early church. There's a huge pushback against tradition and different doctrinal things that divide, and an emphasis on just getting back to the Bible, which of course ends up creating divisions of its own because nobody can agree on the Bible. But let's not talk about that. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting movement. I think any movement you're a part of, you have things that feel right and things where there's tensions, and
Of course.
I'm comfortable being here in those tensions right now, and it's been it's been home for the last year and a half, and yeah.
Is there any tension between you and your wife? And just to go first, I'll go first. My wife is the most staunch and violent anti-Catholic you'll ever meet. So there's some tension in my home.
So I know you're not asking specifically about Catholicism, but my wife has said that if I become Catholic, she'll leave me. So I could see myself slowly drifting into the Catholic thing eventually, because a lot of more academics tend to have that kind of moment. I've noticed a lot of my academic Christian friends end up becoming Catholic. And I could see them eventually ganging up on me and convincing me. But my wife is very set on the fact that women can't be priests, being a deal breaker for her. And that's something she's wrestling with in her own context as well, because that's not a non-issue in Protestantism. It's just that Protestantism has a more diverse range of perspectives on it, perhaps.
Well, you can tell her
It's not as unified.
you can tell her that the Catholic Church teaches that she is priest, prophet, and king. Okay, so welcome home. Welcome to the Catholic Church.
Well, you can try, man. You call her up and you go for it.
Yeah. I always like to interview the spouse or the partner. So if you want to give her my contact information and we'll make it happen, that would be fun, because I get the other side of the coin. What did he type? Jonathan? Oh, he got it all wrong. He got me backwards. But no, I'm
Yeah.
just cutting. I'm just kidding. But you know,
So that's
there's always
yeah.
tension between any two human beings. This is the funny thing. Like you could have two pastors from the same denomination, and they're going to have a lot of differences. They don't have to focus on the differences. They can focus on the common ground. It's a choice. It's a choice. Like there are deal breakers. There are red flags where it's like, I'm not going to let that one slide. Like what you said, I need to clarify. Okay, did you mean what I think you meant?
Yeah.
Because people have some wacky ideas, and sometimes you don't know until it just slips out in the course of a conversation. Like you don't believe in the eternity of hell. What? You know, you don't believe in the immortal, immaterial soul. What? Like these are actual things. I've had conversations with Christians where I'm just mind blown. During my, I've been doing this podcast for about 6 years. I've talked to all kinds of people,
Yeah.
and we talked about the canon of scripture, where we didn't talk about it because we're not supposed to talk about it. It's too hot of a topic. But I met a guy who believes that he has the infallible canon of scripture revealed to him by God himself, and it's only 4 books, right? And it's like,
What are the books?
I would need
I'd
to
really
pull
like
up.
to know.
I would need to pull up the reference. Let me see if I can
That's
find it.
huge. He figured it out.
Well, he didn't figure it out. He
Well,
was he
thank.
had a revelation,
We've been waiting for
personal
someone to solve
revelation.
this.
If you can just
You don't
ramble.
actually need to give me the books. That's fine. I was
Oh,
just,
okay. I was
yeah.
gonna find it.
Obviously, one of them is my book. That script.
Here you go.
So,
So,
um, but yeah,
uh,
as to your question about my wife, I think more generally, beside Catholicism, um, I think we're both. The interesting tension is I went from incredibly progressive to an incredibly conservative context. She grew up in an incredibly conservative context and then moved with me to Vancouver in the progressive context. And so we've kind of been Benjamin buttoning it where we're both starting at opposite hands but meeting in the middle, like he does with Kate Blanchett in the movie, where I became less, I don't like the term liberal, but less stereotypically liberal. And she became less stereotypically conservative. And somewhere in the middle is where we've met. And there's some tension when she, almost goes back to some of the progressive things that I've personally worked through, because that scares me, because those are things I've worked through. And so I'm scared of those things in some way. You would think I'd feel unscared of them because I'd overcome them, but no, then you're scared of it. And she's scared that I'll go to certain views that are conservative. But at the same time, I think we've done a good job of constantly communicating through this whole process. And I think we are journeying together well, or at least we're trying to journey together well. And she finished her master's in church history. She's wanting to do a PhD. And I think this is a juncture in our marriage where it would be really easy for me as the man to just not be supportive with that journey she's going on. And that would be the beginning of a rift that could slowly pull us apart. And I'm praying and trying really hard to not let that happen, because I want to support her the way she supported me. And that's hard to do. And I'm not great at it, but well, that's what I'm trying to do. And I think we are succeeding so far.
nice.
Though if you get her on here, she might be like, hell no. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you touched on, we've been talking, it's come up a few times, this idea of conservative, progressive, whatever words you want to use, we get the idea, left, right, or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter what label you use. Everyone's going to fuss about the exact word that we use. Doesn't really matter. But what is a caricature that you could paint in broad strokes, and it's just silly, it's just for fun, of the left and the right in Christianity? What is a liberal, progressive Christian? What does that look like? And feel free to poke fun and exaggerate. And then on the other side, on the right, just sort of, how would you characterize it?
I mean, if I'm just going to paint the caricature, the conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical Christian, it's got a Bible in one hand, a gun in the other. They're being carried around by immigrants, well preaching against immigration, but also insisting they're not racist and that systemic racism isn't a real thing. Uh, you know, well saying that they just believe in the Bible and nothing else, even though what they actually mean is they have adopted a very specifically 20th century American post-Enlightenment view of everything that is the Bible.
Small T
And
tradition.
and as they're pretending to not have a metaphysical worldview that they impose on the text, they go ahead and proceed to do just that. And so, crying about unborn aborted fetuses while their guns go and kill thousands of children in schools. That's the caricature, at least, right?
Fair enough, yeah.
So at the opposite end, you have the caricature of the progressive person who doesn't really believe in sin, and yet is constantly talking about the systemic injustice in the world that those damn conservatives keep ignoring. And so they're in many ways influenced. This is the caricature, but they're Marxist, not just in economics, but in their view more broadly of how society works. It's not driven by a God above, it's driven by social, economic, and political factors. They are imposing will over life, and so they're willing to sacrifice unborn children to Moloch in abortions to, in order to preserve human autonomy and freedom. And so all they care about is individual freedom, and then that contradicts somehow with the American Republican belief in freedom, and both sides have a weird view of what freedom is. Because Republicans want freedom for guns, but not homosexuals. And then people on the other side, the progressive side, don't want freedom for things like guns, etc. But then they do want free. Like, it's confusing to me.
It's
I
very
don't even.
confusing. Yeah, you
There's,
did
there's,
you did
there's
touch on an
different.
interesting point though, with the freedom being at the heart of both sides. That's very interesting. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, well, it is. Both sides think that they're emphasizing freedom. They apply freedom selectively for certain issues and not for others. But again, these are the caricatures. And like I said, I can see both of those sides. I've lived in both places. So don't ask me which one's correct.
Yeah. Well, there's the middle way. There's that just mean. And so I was going to ask you as a follow-up question, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus say? What does Jesus teach?
I don't know, man. Well, because it's often the people in the middle who really annoy me as well, because they're
What's the caricature of the ones in the middle then?
The ones in the middle are like, I don't let feelings sway me. Both sides are caught up in emotions. I just stand objectively back and try to decide based on the facts. And it's like, shut up. You don't do that. That doesn't even exist. Like, anyways. So no, I mean, I wanna try to hold things in tension. More and more, I don't know. What would Jesus say? I don't know if Jesus would have one standard thing that he would say blanket to everyone, because his answers were so personalized.
Yeah.
I can say maybe what Jesus would say to me. And yeah, I don't know.
What would that be? Is it too personal to share?
I don't know what it would be, but I can tell you what the tension in my head is. It would be on the nose and blunt and honest, but also with as much grace as is infinitely possible to him.
Yeah. It wouldn't crush you.
It would.
It would be an open door, an open window, and fresh, and involving
I
him?
can't even put it in words. It would almost be Aslan roaring in my face,
Ah,
and that being the most terrifying thing ever, and yet safe. Maybe not safe. He's not a tame lion, but you know what I'm
ah,
saying. It would be a terror that was somehow comforting. I don't know.
mm.
I What would he say to me?
Go and sin no more.
Yeah, well, and that's the beauty of that line is no one has condemned you. Well, then neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin. That's a line that holds those things in tension. Go now and leave your life of sin, but also I don't condemn you. And so, so
Did you know
yeah,
that most, well, not most, but a lot of biblical scholars today think that that's not part of canon, that
it really
women caught
upsets
in
me that John
adultery,
8 isn't considered.
canonical.
It is debated. It was very influential in my own story.
Yeah.
And so my general sense is I don't care.
Yeah.
I think that the original canon was secured by the Spirit working through the community and the authors. And so I don't think it's a huge deal to extend that inspiration a little bit to say that story got in there later through the inspiration of the Spirit and the community and the church. Like I don't see that as a huge difficulty for me, even if it's not part of the original manuscript.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe I'm stupid for saying that,
No,
but
no, no, no. I mean, a lot of Christians make the Bible into an idol, and I don't want to do that. I do believe that the Bible is inerrant. There's no error in the Bible, and it's infallible, and its primary author is God, as the
yeah,
church teaches. I do believe that. I just don't think that anyone's actually ever seen the Bible. We only have copies of manuscripts, faulty manuscripts, and faulty translations of those manuscripts. And so we have a shadow. We have a shadow. As St. Paul said, we see as in a broken mirror or as in a glass darkly. And
yeah.
that's reality. That's reality. Let's live with reality and just deal with it. It's another consequence of original sin and actual sin. So I mean, that's what we're stuck with. Let's just not turn anything into an idol. Let's worship God and let's be open to His Spirit. And I see a book, it's catching my eye. It's got the Holy Spirit in the form of a dove descending there. Can you just talk about it's up at right above your hammer?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
what is
On the
that?
Holy Spirit by St. Basil the Great.
Oh, have you read it?
I read it maybe 12 years ago with Hans Boersma, I don't think he's Catholic, but he's deeply sympathetic.
Okay.
So it was at Regent for a class. So
Was it a good experience, the book and the class?
I recall it being my first graduate class and me being terrified and scrambling to get everything done. So my recollection of it will probably not be great, but I did remember enjoying it, even if I don't remember what it is that I enjoyed. So
Is that Schopenhauer there, The Will to Live? Is that one of your favorite philosophers right there?
oh, the things that are put here are not put for any particular reason.
I know.
They're not necessarily,
I'm just
yeah.
taking a gander. I see Nietzsche there. I see
Yeah. This is kind of my philosophy section, and then it gets more theological up there.
I see
So,
Narnia over on the other side of you. You enjoyed C.S. Lewis?
oh yeah, I love Lewis a lot. I regularly tell people that he's the only author I read for sheer joy.
Hmm.
I feel like I have to force myself to read most things, but he's I read him with ease.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, it's
but
beautiful. It's beautiful the way he can convey very obtuse truths in a digestible form where you feel entertained and enlightened, and it's a real gift. I don't know if you know Chesterton or if you've read anything by him, but he's a funny guy too.
yeah, no, Justin's great as well.
You like him?
So, yeah, I mean, that whole line of thinkers back to back to back, with MacDonald, Chesterton, Lewis. That's
Who's
just
MacDonald? Is that who's
uh
MacDonald?
so each of them kind of had their own kind of here. I'm going to pull up the
It's a family
specific work.
tree of literary
Uh,
giants, or what?
I was thinking of a specific work, but so yeah, there's kind of this train from MacDonald and
Who is MacDonald?
George MacDonald. He wrote like Lilith and some other stuff, and he's influential on Lewis. Chesterton's influential on Lewis, and they're kind of, and then Lewis and Tolkien kind of together. It's yeah, they're just often put in the same kind of breath.
I see.
So yeah,
Pretty cool. I was never a huge fan of Tolkien myself. My dad read us the first Big Fat Book, whatever it was called, when we were kids, and you know, I somewhat enjoyed that. But yeah, it wasn't exactly my cup of tea. I prefer Lewis, and Chesterton for me is more about the little sound bites, like the little catchy witticisms, you know.
yeah,
You know.
yeah, for
But
sure.
I'll look into George MacDonald. Sounds like a very Canadian name.
Yeah, it is, right?
What's his style? Is he funny or is he insightful or what? Was he Catholic?
He's, um,
Anglican?
he's, I don't. I'm gonna look that up. I don't
Google.
actually know. Yeah, I think he was. Yeah, I don't think he was Catholic. He was Protestant, but I don't know specifically what part of Protestant. So I'm not an expert on it, but
Yeah,
yeah. So yeah.
very cool. So what about culturally? Are you into religious music, Christian music, and Gregorian chant, the organ? There's a lot. There's a lot in the history of music that's Christian. Are
I
you?
like how aesthetic your questions have been. You know, about food and music, and it's good. As a theologian philosopher, the questions are often more about truth and not beauty, which is sad. Because as a philosopher, you should hold those together, or at least as a Platonist or a Christian philosopher. I did not, as I said, grow up with the Christian evangelical worship Hillsong kind of subculture. So I have never really been on that worship music train. I have encountered certain types of music that have connected with me on a spiritual level. Recently, I've discovered Sufjan Stevens. I think I said that right.
Yeah.
And that's been very powerful for me.
Is he religious?
Yeah, he's Christian.
No way.
Yeah,
I love his music. He did an album for his deceased mother or parents, whatever it was. Do you remember that one?
Oh, you did?
He did. He did an album.
He did. Yeah. Okay.
You remember that one?
So when I say I've discovered him, that's in the last month.
Okay.
And so I don't know that much about him yet, but I've been like laying out and listening to him and looking at the stars at night, and it's been glorious.
Beautiful.
The other one that's been powerful for me has been U2.
Carey and Lowell is the name of the album. You should look into it. Carey and Lowell.
Okay.
Sufjan Stevens, Carey, and Lowell. I pronounce it Sufjan, but it's probably Sufjan.
I'm probably wrong. To be honest,
I've heard both.
Like I said,
I've heard both. But if you look into Carey and Lowell, that's the album that I first discovered, and I really love it. It's sad though. It's a little bit sad because it's about the loss of parents, of both parents. So.
Oh gosh.
Beautiful though.
Yeah. So yeah, he's been a good experience recently. U2 has been a long running one for me. I think they're kind of religious journal. I've just got Bono's memoir, so I'm hoping to read that soon. But
cool.
The way that he kind of integrates his faith into everything and yet into nothing is really, really interesting. So yeah, but anyway.
Well, there's something magical. You talked about beauty as one of the transcendentals, and there's something about a certain arrangement of music, certain harmonies, certain melodies that will bring a tear to my eye like nothing else can. I don't know. It takes a lot to make me cry, but it could just be a certain melody and it'll bring a tear to my eye. So it's undeniable. There's something transcendent in music and in beauty generally, right?
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think often beauty is seen as important, but is secondary to truth and goodness in that sort of transcendental ontological top. Yeah. And I more and more am thinking maybe that's just not the case. like maybe, and someone would critique that by saying, well, it doesn't matter if you give a poor person nice clothes if they don't have food. But well, maybe, yeah, I could see a poor person giving up food for beauty. And I could see someone dying for beauty. There's been some literary things that I could think of for that. Not to speak for poor people, but I really don't know anymore if goodness is higher than beauty.
Well, they're one, right? That's the whole point. They are. There's a dogma in the Catholic Church where all of the attributes of God are identical among themselves, and they're identical with the essence of God. So
Yeah.
I love that. It's a very Neoplatonic idea also, but
well, everyone thinks they are equal and one, but yet they don't treat them that way, is what I would say. You're definitely right that theoretically the simplicity of God brings all of these things together. But if you ever start to try to treat beauty as equal to morality, everyone's like, no, it's much more important that we be moral and good people. But I mean, well, for example, like in our churches here, everyone would lose their crap if I did some sort of immoral failing, right? I'd lose my job as a professor at a Christian university, all of that. But the horrible aesthetics that we get away with as Christians, no one cares. It's like, it's the prepackaged wafers that we use for communion make me want to shoot someone. Have you seen those things? That I don't know what you guys do for your mass, but we have prepackaged communion wafers that are part of the same container. We have a little cup that has the communion juice in it, and you peel back the top and the bread's there, the little wafers there, and then you peel back the second layer and you get the juice, and it's left for you in the seat. So before the service, someone goes along and puts one for each seat, and then you peel back the plastic when it's the right time and you do it. And I know that this is an efficient and easy way to do this, especially in these bigger churches. It makes sense. But the death of beauty, it feels like any incarnational aesthetic thing that could have happened there is just and I don't think that's a secondary thing. Like the difference between that and when at my church we would take an actual loaf of bread and we would rip it, one that hadn't been cut, like an actual proper loaf that hadn't been cut, and as each person came up, we would rip each individual piece and hand it to them. And that tangible, textured experience, there was something there that was ontologically different. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, 100%. You're speaking with the Catholic here, so yeah, it's the source of summit.
Don't you convert me? Don't do it. I'll get fired, and my wife will leave me.
Fired and divorced. Yeah, there you go.
So, and then I won't be able to get me remarried because I'm a Catholic. So,
get an annulment, easy.
No, so
just kidding. I shouldn't make fun of my faith, but. It's been amazing meeting you, and it's you're an easygoing guy with an affable air about you. That's why I've been ultra cash, like with the conversation, and I haven't been focused in on the theology and all these sorts of things. But I'm hoping you'll come back. I got to go hang with my wife now, or she'll divorce me. But I'm hoping you'll come back and you'll talk to me, and we'll talk about theology and philosophy some more.
Do you and your wife have any tensions you'd like to share with me now?
Next time we'll go into it.
But yeah, I'd love to come back. It was fun.
It was amazing meeting you. And any other shameless plugs you want to do before I wrap up?
Well, I guess that maybe I should. Yeah, check out the book, Monotheism, an absurdly arrogant attempt to answer all the problems of the last 2,000 years in one night at a pub. It's on Amazon and all the other places. The audiobook just came out, and it's fantastic. I don't say that because I wrote it fantastic. It's because the actor does an amazing job with the different voices, including a hilarious Eastern, borderline Russian accent that I'm not sure if is offensive, but it's very funny, even if it is. So check that out on Amazon. And also, if you are interested in that episode on Who's Afraid of Catholicism, check out the Spiritually Incorrect podcast at spirituallyincorrectpodcast.com because it was a really good episode. And he didn't convince us to become Catholic, but he made one hell of a case for it. And we were blessed by the conversation. So
amazing. It's been great meeting you, and feel free to send me guests, potential guests, including your beautiful wife, okay?
all right, all the best.
All the best. Please pray for me and mine, and I've enrolled you and yours in a perpetual mass, which means every day till the end of time, you're going to be getting flooded by the graces of the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, okay?
All right, well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Take good care, and we'll talk soon.
All the best.
God bless you. Bye.